All right, now to the breaking news happening right now. Anti-government protests in Iran now widespread, also violent, deadly in several cases.
Yeah, and we do want to warn you that you are about to see some images that are disturbing. There are bodies lying in the streets after a burst of gunfire. We just don't want you to be taken aback, but here you go. This is a video that was tweeted by a human rights organization. Now, I want to get you caught up on what we know at this moment. First of all, 2 anti-government protesters were killed overnight, and at least 5 were shot. Iranian officials say their security forces had nothing to do with that.
Now, there are videos on social media that appear to show large groups of anti-government protesters fighting with police. Now, CNN cannot independently confirm the videos, but in some, the crowds appear to be chanting, "We don't want an Islamic republic," and "Death to the dictator." So this is one of the dozens of protests happening right now. And these demonstrations, they began Thursday and have since spread across Iran. You see the locations where some of these videos and reports are coming from.
A top Iranian official issuing this stern warning to protesters this morning, saying they will pay the price for disorder. Golnar Martabali, a reporter for Bloomberg based in Tehran, spoke with CNN a short time ago.
There have been reports on official and semi-official media in Iran, and some of the news agencies here, they've made reference to overnight skirmishes and what they call vandalism by protesters of things like bus stops and some public property. And the fact that some of these official news sites, some of which are aligned to maybe more very conservative and hardline elements in Iran's state establishment, are actually addressing that in their reports in itself is interesting and not necessarily expected, but it shows that there is something definitely going on, and that some official media sources, though not all, are addressing the protests that happened yesterday.
Golnar, is this mainly about the economy, or is there something more here?
Well, I think it's a very complicated picture, and a couple of analysts that I've spoken to here, even they can't simplify or fully define what's going on. They say themselves that there are various things that they think that have contributed to what's happened. I know that your correspondent just now referred to a statement from the first vice president, referring to it as a warning against people who are trying to stir resentment against the government. But I think what's actually, to provide some context there, I wouldn't say that's a chilling warning. I would say that's actually the first, the vice president sending some kind of signal to the opponents of President Hassan Rouhani, who are in the hardline parties and factions within Iranian politics here. That's what he means when he says that. The government right now, there are 2 different narratives, I think, emerging within Iranian domestic media. One is the government and the supporters of President Rouhani saying that these protests were started by hardline opponents who were protesting and voicing their grievances about the situation in the economy. And they turned into something that is now more broadly about the wider state system here. The other narrative is being explained in more kind of hardline aligned news agencies in Iran, which is these are protests by people that are angry at the government, at their mismanagement of the economy, and that the government needs to be accountable, and President Rouhani and his cabinet need to be more accountable to those grievances.
Thank you to Golnar Martabali there in Tehran for us as well.
There are reports of internet slowdowns and outages across parts of Iran, but they're not stopping protesters from trying to get the world's attention.
Yeah, we're getting several images from social media users. We want to point out again, these are images we cannot independently confirm, but want to show you what we're seeing. There's a woman, you see, standing in a busy street without her headscarf, waving a white shawl. This is apparently part of a social media campaign using the hashtag White Wednesdays. It protests a law that's forcing women to wear hijabs. And this has become the latest symbol of Iranian women's struggle.
Joining us now, Fred Pleitkin, CNN senior international correspondent. He's been to Iran about a dozen times. Also with us, Maziar Bahari. He's an Iranian journalist and filmmaker who was jailed by the Iranian government back in 2009. Good morning to both of you. And
Good
first,
morning.
I want to pick up where Golnar left off, Fred, and the protest of the government. Is this focused on President Rouhani? Is this focused on the Ayatollah and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard? Where is there a consensus of the dissatisfaction?
Yeah. Look, I think one of the interesting things about this protest, Victor, is that it seems to be focused on the entire power structure, if you can say that it's focused at all. Because this seems to have morphed from something where, as Golnar was saying, might have been started by hardliners to criticize the government of President Hassan Rouhani, but it certainly seems to have turned into something that is a lot more than that. And two things really stand out. The protests themselves aren't necessarily large, but they're widespread in many areas of Iran, not only in the large cities, but also in smaller towns as well. That seems to indicate that there is wider discontent in many places in the entire country. That certainly has a root in a lot of economic factors, but seems to go beyond that as well. And the other interesting thing is what we were also pointing out is that it doesn't only seem to be directed at one or the other political group. This is not fighting between the political groups that we know in Iran, the hardliners and the reformers. This seems to be aimed at the entire power structure itself. You've seen pictures of Iran's Supreme Leader torn down. You've also seen people chant against President Hassan Rouhani, which seems to indicate that this population in Iran, at least part of it, which is very young, highly educated, does not feel that either the government or the existing clerical and Revolutionary Guard power structure seems to be delivering to them what they want. And that's about more than just economic factors. That's also about getting the possibility to unfold their potential, which many Iranians apparently don't feel that they're able to do, Victor.
Maziar, Iran's interior minister promises that the country will definitely, I'm quoting, definitely confront disorder. What does confront disorder mean in Iran?
Confronting disorder most probably mean that they're going to imprison the protesters, they're going to shut down the media, they're going to narrow the internet bandwidth, they're going to shut down the mobile internet, and the things that the regime knows how to do. This is the manifestation of people's frustration with 4 decades of corrupt rule of clerics. And that's why, as your correspondent said, it is targeted at the power structure, at the system as a whole, and not one faction of the government against another.
Maziar, I want to focus on something that you highlighted in the Washington Post, and it's about what we're hearing from the Iranian government and what we're not. They are responding to claims that the 2 people who have been killed were at their hand. They deny that. They're discussing violence. They're responding to the President of the United States, but they are not responding to the concerns of the people. And you highlight that early on that this was going to be a likelihood that they're going to blame this on some imperial foreign power and not discuss exactly what the people are frustrated about.
The problem is that even if they want to, they cannot. They are not able to solve the economic problems of Iran because of corruption, because of mismanagement that has been going on for the past 4 decades, and because of the different monopolies. For example, the Revolutionary Guards are not only a military force in Iran, but also they have the biggest industrial complex in the country. The Supreme Leader supervises over some of the biggest industries, factories, and commercial centers in Iran. So even if President Rouhani wants to solve the problem, even if the Supreme Leader wants to solve the problem, they are not able to do that because of nepotism, because of cronyism, because of corruption of the system.
Fred, Representative Will Hurd yesterday said all of the folks that have ever stood up against the Ayatollahs have been killed. Help us understand the risk people are taking when they stand in front of a police officer and say, we don't want an Islamic republic, or death to the dictators.
Well, yeah. Well, that's certainly a big risk that a lot of the protesters are taking, especially in light of the fact that if you take every one of these demonstrations that's going on by themselves, they aren't really that big. And there certainly are very, very tough security forces known as the Basij militias that are in place there in Tehran and in other places as well that do crack down really hard. So this is definitely a big risk that a lot of these people are taking, but it seems to have now gotten to a point where people in many towns are willing to take that risk. And if you look overnight, a lot of it was more than just people chanting in the street. There were some government buildings that were apparently attacked. There were some posters that were torn down. And that's something where the government says it's going to confront all this. But I think one of the big issues that we also have to look at is the nuclear agreement between Iran and world powers, which many, many Iranians had really put a lot of hope into, a lot of hope in Iran not only opening up economically, but in general opening up to the world. And I think that's one of the things where a lot of people feel that President Rouhani hasn't necessarily delivered what he promised. They also obviously the U.S. remaining very tough on that as well, but also where they see that a lot of the economic benefits simply haven't trickled down yet, guys.
Soon after that Iran deal was cemented, President Rouhani said that this would be the golden page in the history of Iran. That's 2 years on now. The people of Iran clearly do not believe that.